Watch this.
They're just unnecessary because we already have some great policies in place.
The latest library bill may have some changes in it, but that hasn't seemed to change the opinion of actual librarians.
Sometimes we find ourselves chasing on things that turn out to be nothing.
Someone else who doesn't think some of the proposed legislation is necessary, our Superintendent of Public Instruction. We get Debbie Critchfield's take on the latest public money for private school bill. And speaking of schools, Kuna High School is celebrating a big anniversary this year, and a lot more has changed than the hairstyles. We got an early peek yesterday at a bill piquing early interest this legislative session. Not much of a surprise to many since it's a continuation of a failed effort from last year. It's a push from Republican lawmakers to regulate what books get to go on which library shelf. Bill sponsor, Representative Jaron Crane, outlined the details and the changes from the former version for us yesterday, but that didn't seem to change what a lot of our viewers had to say about this third run at libraries. Remember House Bill 666 from the 2022 session? Anyway, Julie wrote in from Meridian saying Idaho's lawmakers need to stay in their lane. Rebecca points out temperance and morality is subjective. And Scott, well, he says local policies are already in place. Stop trying to reinvent the wheel. As for the librarians, they agree with those comments. The Idaho Library Association released a statement saying the bill undermines library users' rights. Andrew Bartline sat down with a local librarian to ask why that might be, even with this new watered-down version of legislating libraries.
At a Boise intersection named for winning, the Victory Branch Ada Community Library finds itself again playing defense.
It is unfortunate that we're facing this.
Another bill at the State House regulating library content.
Kids that are 18 and under don't have any reason to access that material, and so we're being consistent with that.
But ask the professionals.
There's already a very open two-way process.
Or even just watch, because they know all about redundancy. Mary DeWalt directs the library.
We're not exactly sure why suddenly this is all called into question. And so, especially because we had not heard from our own communities that there was a problem.
The bill wants to ensure inappropriate books are not available to kids in school or public libraries. Libraries can resolve complaints in 30 days or face a civil lawsuit for $250.
Plus unlimited cap, other damages, whatever that might mean, not to mention the time and the litigation and such.
DeWalt further finds fault in the subjective nature of current state law. Keeping kids away from nudity and sexual conduct seems reasonable.
Yeah.
But the state definition,
we don't know. And we don't believe that that's constitutional.
it includes the word homosexual. DeWalt says the bill would stop libraries from allowing that content to reach people under 18 years old.
Simply because the character is homosexual, is that an issue?
Maybe.
So,
But banning those books isn't the goal.
Move that piece of material to an adult section of the library, the problem goes away.
Relocate it back to the shelf the state says it belongs, if there is one.
if it encompasses both school and public libraries, and they're talking about moving an item to an adult collection, schools don't have an adult collection area.
And for the libraries that do,
We can't card someone, for example. I'm just unclear on whether it was really thought through completely.
while the umbrella of intentions is clear and concise,
Temperance and morality.
the Ada Community Library knows those definitions to be subjective.
That should be up to the individual and the individual family, parents guiding their children and teaching them the family values, not an external person imposing on one family what they feel their values should be.
A similar bill failed to become law last session.
But I was disappointed in the veto.
And these librarians, they're used to tackling a tedious task a couple times over again.
The important thing is for us to have a much better relationship with our community rather than a top-down directive from government.
DeWalt points out libraries are run locally by
or otherwise appointed boards, and they represent that local community. And because of that, a library in Rupert is different than a library that you'd find in Moscow. She also points out that the content must be considered as whole, Brian. She talked to you about this last legislative session in depth about you can take a paragraph out of a 400-page novel and say, I have a problem with this. Well, when you look at the whole piece of work, she says there is value to it, and that kind of goes back to the Supreme Court, the Miller test, I believe. Yes.
1973, Miller versus California, and in that they ruled that yes, it has to lack serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. They apply the community standards. It has to be patently offensive as well. And it's worth pointing out because in that ruling, they said, because Miller wanted this to be like a countrywide standard when it comes to morality. Well, Justice Berger said, no, it's neither realistic nor constitutionally sound to read the First Amendment as requiring the people of Maine or Mississippi to accept the public depiction of conduct found tolerable in, say, Las Vegas. So he says it must be determined on a local basis.
And I imagine Boise would feel different than a very rural area.
Yeah, so it still kind of applies. But what else? This also kind of applies to kind of what you spoke with today, or spoke to, I should say, Joe. Yeah. That would be the Superintendent of Public Instruction, kind of talking about content in schools, but kind of in a broader fashion.
Yeah, and it's certainly on their radar, what Andrew was just talking about. Of course, there are libraries inside schools. But yeah, speaking with Superintendent of Public Instruction, Debbie Critchfield today, she's now into year 2 of her term, and a little bit of a rerun from last year to kick off 2024. Governor Little made it clear in his State of the State address this week, education in Idaho is a top major priority. Idaho education made headlines locally and nationally for a variety of reasons in 23, and Superintendent Critchfield says that she feels like we've already hit the ground running this week with the State of the State and lawmakers getting to work on it.
In some ways, it feels like we just took a weekend off from sine die of 2023, and everyone's coming in. Many of the same topics, many of the same issues that either paused or just got more steam. And so I think we'll see a lot of those same things come up along with some new ones.
Big topic of conversation last year was school choice. It looks like it'll be a big conversation this year. When you heard the governor say in his address that he wants to expand school choice, he wants to really embrace it, but he also wants to protect the public school system, how did you take that comment?
I agree with it. And something that I have said over time, I don't think that those things are mutually exclusive. We have an incredible amount of school choice in Idaho. I will protect and defend and honor a parent's right to make a decision of where their child goes to school. Then we get into this conversation of, is the state of Idaho required or have an obligation to pay for every single choice that I have? And so I think that that's what's going to be debated.
And those vouchers, the ESAs, they didn't end up working out last year, but we understand there'll be some new pitches this year. One of them involves tax credits, $5,000 tax credits. What are your impressions of this idea and kind of the conversation surrounding it?
Well, I think one of the reasons this issue wasn't, didn't make it to the finish line in some ways was because it wasn't the right fit for Idaho. We have a lot of people from out of state groups and other education entities that come in and say, hey, Idaho, we think you should do this. And I love that Idahoans say, yeah, that's not exactly the right fit that we have for us. Now, tax credit, I think, is sort of morphing or evolving some of that conversation. A consideration that I will be weighing, when you do a tax credit, you're taking right off the top, which means there's less money to go not only to education, but to transportation, for roads, for corrections, for health and welfare. So you're reducing the amount of money that's in that pot.
CRT conversations, DEI, content. With the controversy surrounding education in recent years in Idaho, does that make your job, I guess, more difficult, or is it kind of just, this is what I have to deal with?
A little bit of both of those things. Sometimes I don't want to ever devalue a legitimate concern that a parent or a policy or policymaker or legislator has. With that said, sometimes we find ourselves chasing on things that turn out to be nothing, or maybe more was told, or kind of this game of telephone. But I sure hope that we can get this focus back to how we're preparing kids. We want our kids to be able to read. We're going to talk a lot at our office and myself about getting back to basics.
And getting back to basics is also part of the conversation of addressing COVID learning loss. Brian, that is something that their office is tracking very closely. And it's not just about what's going on in the classroom. It's getting kids in the classroom. To be very honest, Superintendent Critchfield and I talked about the fact that there are some schools in some areas where getting back in the classroom has been a little bit of a difficult situation after being remote, after being out of the building for so many years. So she said it's back to basics in the sense of people got to get their homework done.
Yeah.
We got to get back into the classroom. And there's a lot of, I guess, ideas out there on how to fix that. But most importantly, Critchfield was talking to me about math scores, for example. Those need to get boosted up here in the state of Idaho. And I know that's something the legislature is watching as they weigh this idea of, I guess, outcome-based funding.
I know it's kind of was hard to get her to weigh down, or I guess to kind of pin her down on her opinion on this new tax credit thing. But that's an interesting take that, yes, it does take money out of other pools as well, not just education. So we'll see how that goes forward. Thanks, Joe.
I've always said that if there came a point in time in this race where I couldn't see a path to accomplishing that goal, that I would get out.
And he did. Yesterday, Republican presidential candidate Chris Christie dropped out of the race for president. You're probably wondering, why are we talking about Chris Christie here in Idaho? And you probably are thinking, well, that would automatically drop him from the Idaho Republican Presidential Caucus, which is why we're talking about it. But not so. It doesn't work that way. According to the party declaration of candidacy filing rules, since he paid the $50,000 filing fee, that was 90 days before the March caucus, he will remain on the ballot. So if you're participating in the presidential caucus on March, you're going to see Chris Christie's name on it. However, his chances of getting half that fee back for showing up in Idaho campaign, that seems pretty slim at this point. So the Idaho GOP is going to keep his $50,000 as a donation since that fee was non-refundable, and they plan to use it to pay for the March caucus. We only wondered about what happens with that money because it appears the former New Jersey governor, well, seems to be very concerned with campaign cash and not just his. Last night in New Hampshire, just before he announced that he was stepping down, he was caught on an open mic and apparently discussing former South Carolina Governor Nikki Haley.
Yeah, that's what you get. Yeah, I mean, look, she spent $68 million so far, just on TV. Spent $68 million so far, $59 million by DeSantis, and we spent 12. I mean, who's punching above their weight and who's getting a return on their investment, you know? And she's going to get smoked, and you and I both know it. She's not up to this.
All right, well, that audio went out over the live stream feed, but only for a few moments, as you heard there. As of now, Christie has not endorsed any other GOP candidates, but it doesn't sound like he's going to be throwing his weight behind Nikki Haley, does it? Well, like most places in southern Idaho, the arrival of the railroad and water, of course, would often combine for the origin story of a town. Well, those two things came together in Kuna in 1909. The railroad was already there, but it took the opening of the New York Canal to bring water out of the Boise River up on, well, to the high desert to really kickstart the community. The first building was a combination store, assembly hall, office, living space upstairs. That was built in Kuna in 1910. And to paraphrase that is, Ray Kinsella, if you build it, they will come. And people soon moved to Kuna as soon as, they could, and other infrastructure buildings were built and needed, like schools. And 100 years ago, next month, Kuna High School is going to celebrate its anniversary. The building, the original one, that doesn't exist anymore. But the memories and the history will be honored for the next several months.
I knew this wasn't our original high school, and I think that was it.
One way to learn about the generational history of the high school
It's our 100th year.
is from two first-generation Kuna kids, Melanie Johnson
I really didn't know anything.
and Theo Noe,
No, I kind of went into it blind for the most part.
have spent their senior year studying the past century of their school.
It's a huge farming community. It's always been a farming community. RFFA is still very prominent.
In the early 1900s, the city of Kuna was just a few years old, with fewer than 400 people. But those people had kids, and those kids, well, they needed to learn.
The very first school was in a tent, which I thought was kind of weird. So it was how is that even possible?
They eventually built brick versions, but it wasn't long before they needed one just for the big kids. So Kuna held a bond election to pay for it. And at first, it failed, since they couldn't decide where to put it. But a second try would produce the money to build a $40,000 high school building downtown, which was dedicated in February of 1924.
There was only 14 in the entire graduating class.
And you're graduating this year?
Yes.
And how many are you graduating with?
We have over 400. We have close to 409. It's our biggest class ever.
That's nuts.
Yeah.
What hasn't changed? The mascot. Has it always been cavemen?
It has.
Always.
Yes. It's because we have the Kuna caves out there.
Even if the image of him or her has. What about the girls' teams? Do they like being called Lady Cavemen?
I know some people kind of laugh at it. They don't understand the caveman part of it. I don't know, we're used to it.
Theo and Melanie discovered other odd things in their research.
First, it was a farmer.
Like how they got to school.
He would take his wagon around with his horses and pick up kids and drop them off at schools. It's the community pitched in, kind of help these kids out get an education.
And how a few times they had to actually help the school.
I found it interesting how many times the school burned down, because it was more than once.
At least 3 times. Yeah, there's something going on here.
Yeah, I hope it doesn't repeat.
But what's been most interesting is what they've picked up.
In the 40s, we had an archery club.
Just from pictures.
When I look at the pictures in the yearbook, I don't know, I just see a lot of fun energy. Their hair is very different from how we are now.
I mean, in the yearbooks, I thought it was interesting how everyone looked very similar to each other, how they dressed and all that, but nowadays everyone has their unique style.
It just shows how much life has changed since then.
A lot. Something I learned back then, school started in the spring after the planting was complete, which is why the official anniversary of the school is February 18th. Kuna is kicking off their centennial celebration tonight with an alumni event happening during tonight's boys basketball game. By the way, they've been using the current high school since 2002, and back then it was built to accommodate 1,100 students. Sure, they've expanded a bit since, but still, it only increased to hold about 1,500 students. Kuna High School currently has 1,900 students attending, which is why this year will be the biggest graduating class ever, as you heard. So they need more space, and in a case of history repeating itself, last spring, just like in the spring of 1920, Kuna failed to pass a bond to do that.
Snow is starting to fall today, but just not everywhere just yet. This is the view from Tamarack this morning, or really lack thereof. You can see at times you can see the ski lift at times, but really inconsistent because we've had quite the snow stack up there. The snow stake gets cleared off at 4 o'clock, so it does look like there is 1 inch of snow there. However, that's just adding to the original 9 that there was earlier this afternoon. So Tamarack saw 10 inches of snow today, and I updated some of these totals for the other mountain areas. Sun Valley, the lower end of the totals, but up to 1.5 inches today. And this is really just a taste of what is to come for us. We have an Arctic front that will be continuing to move south, and that will impact our area sometime tomorrow. Timing's still a little bit something that we're tracking, but that Arctic air will be moving south, and that will influence how much snow and where we end up seeing the snow. So what we will see all the way through Saturday, we will see some snow stacking up across the region. And at times we will have limited visibility when you get the combination of the snow and wind. And in turn, that will make driving difficult across the region at times. We'll see ice, we'll see the buildup of that snow. And again, that wind is also a factor. So here's kind of a wide view of what we're looking at. You can see this is the radar and satellite imagery as of now. Then as we switch to the modeled precipitation, you can see more of this snow is going to drift to the south along with this cold Arctic front. You can see the purples getting a little bit more south. And so tomorrow we start to see that snow pick up even more so, and then into the evening hours as well. So we've got the cold air coming in, we've got snow coming in. And an additional round as we go into Saturday is what we're looking at as well. So that's kind of the big picture view. Now let's take a little bit more of a detailed view so you can see just where we're seeing some of those snow showers, expected to see them through tonight, continuing into tomorrow morning. So the commute will likely be a little bit tricky tomorrow. And wherever we see these bands of snow, see this long line of snow here, wherever we see the bands of snow set up is where we will see those higher totals, and that will dictate the higher totals wherever those bands will be. And that is expected to drift to the south. And then Saturday, we see another swath of moisture move in. However, we have been tracking the movement of that moisture. Originally today, it was tracking a little bit more to the south, but then it switched back to the north and is continuing to trend to the north. So Saturday still looks to be a big day for snow. It will just all depend on the track of that system and that moisture. But you can see right now, things staying a little bit more on the light side. Thankfully, a lot of temperatures are above freezing right now in valley spots. So things staying a little bit on the less icy side for the moment. But however, after we get this snow that we're expecting through the weekend, Sunday things taper off. Then we've got really cold air that's coming through with that cold Arctic air. And you can see as we go into Monday and Tuesday, we're looking at single-digit lows, something we haven't seen in about a year. So after all the snow and busyness that will come with that, we will see some certainly icy and cold conditions.
All right, so many comments today. We've got a little extra time to get through them today. Hopefully we can get through as many as we can. Jack in Boise, legislature would have more credibility if they included actual librarians in drafting their onerous legislation. We don't know if that was the case with this bill or not. With all the interest in either banning or segregating books, usually about LGBTQ issues, one has to wonder why books about war, killing, and death seem to be okay. That's from Mark. Banning books is not legislating. It's creating problems and processes that don't need fixed. The director has it right when she said it's more important for the library to have a good relationship with the citizens than it is with elected officials. That one is from Pam B. Why can't parents be responsible? It's a question we hear a lot. If parents looked at the books their children wanted to check out, we wouldn't need the legislators to be the surrogate parents, says Kelly. This one's a long one. Again, it's a good one. Some well-written ones today. Library access and use represents freedom. Our librarians are honorable in trying to do right by their patrons. If parents want to restrict reading and learning for their child, it's on them to monitor, not the librarians. Librarians do the best they can to monitor. Please don't limit access to many for the vocal few, says PJ in Ada County. 6 years ago, this is from Rhonda in Boise. 6 years ago, when we moved here from the Midwest, we were assured Idaho does not let government manage your life. Last 2 years have been attacks on parents, the medical choices for their child, attacks on our parents that they do not have the ability to watch the books their children will check out at the library. This is not a government that allows their citizens to make choices for their families. A couple more. Will the proposed library law create an avenue for harassment towards libraries and librarians? I think so, says David. Maybe that is the real intent. It's a question we asked yesterday, but by lowering that threshold, that fee from $2,500 to $250, that was kind of the hope to kind of not let that happen. But who knows where it stops? Because if you're offended, well, then you can also sue for a little bit more than that, right? When will the legislature start tackling big issues all Idahoans care about? We'll find out, hopefully. See you tomorrow.